The brain-gut axis allows for two-way communication between the gut microbiome and behavioral health. And any disruptions in our gut microbiome are therefore going to disrupt behavior. And any disruptions in behavior are going to affect our gut microbiome. But what if there was a program that addressed both of these symptoms at the same time? Well, today we're going to speak with Amanda Lee from Brain Balance, which is a program that is doing just that without the use of medication. I'm Norma Flood, and I'm an integrative and functional nutritionist. Welcome to Go With Your Gut. Hello, Amanda. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Excited to have you here. So before we begin, I would like to first really give a background of what you do. You are the regional manager for Brain Balance. In fact, 3 locations in San Diego County. And Brain Balance is a holistic brain health program that combines cognitive, physical, and sensory training with nutritional guidance to strengthen and build brain connectivity without the use of medication. Although I do understand that if people are on medication, you meet them where they're at. And your integrative approach build stronger connections that translate to improved attention, behaviors, and social emotional well-being. And so I'm excited to hear how Brain Balance has been effective in helping so many people. But I'd love to hear, Amanda, what brought you to Brain Balance? What's the story? What's your story?
Thank you for asking. My story is unique in that I've been in education for the last 20 years, and I often saw from infants to seniors, I've worked with it all, no real program that really supported the whole person. And the challenges that I saw individuals facing were either dismissed or the typical mainstream route of medication or traditional therapies just wasn't enough. Oftentimes it was a Band-Aid. And when I came across Brain Balance, I realized they had a very similar mission to mine, which was giving each person the opportunity to really meet their potential. And again, valuing them as a whole and not seeing well-being through a deficit or sick care model, and really fostering everyone's strength and knowing that we're only as strong as our weakest link as well. So building up our whole baseline and a foundation to allow us to thrive and not just survive every day really inspired me and led me to want to spread that message and give people hope as well.
Right. So were you in a classroom setting before you were working with Brain Balance? How were you connected to education?
A little bit, but I always knew being in the classroom wasn't right for me either. So most of my experience has been in non-formal and informal education. I've done a lot of wildlife and outdoor education. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And I had interviewed, a teacher who in the summer, he leads backpacking trips on another episode. We talk about getting people out in the wilderness. So, but a funny connection
people
there.
On hikes, families. And that there's a lot of science behind that sensory engagement and being outdoors and being in touch and being mindful with your surroundings, which again, everything I've done in my life has really led me to Brain Balance today.
That's awesome. Yes, I feel like we always have a story that brings us to the work we do when we follow our passion, you know?
That's right.
So the Brain Balance program, it is very comprehensive. So I want to find a way for our listeners to understand just how it's broken down. And so when I go to your website, I see these 5 domains, right? And it's sensory, motor, behavioral, social, emotional, and then there's also cognitive.
That's right.
But then these 5 domains are supported by development exercises and nutrition.
That's right.
So I guess how would you describe your program and how those are brought together?
So we work with kids, teens, and adults, almost all ages. My youngest student typically is about age 3. My oldest student so far has been age 93. So there's no age limit, no matter where you are and what stage in life you're in. Brain health is really important. And so you mentioned the 5 domains in brain health. Those 5 domains, they interact and they rely on one another for us to function at our best and be able to essentially not struggle, right? If you want to have adequate executive function skills, be able to plan your day, your projects, be able to relate to others, problem solve, you name it, it all comes down to how your brain is wired and connected. And so in terms of development that you mentioned, it really comes down to the maturity of your brain. Again, whether you're a child or adult, that has to be in play, and you have to consider what your brain is doing or not doing that results in our everyday actions. And so having this understanding of these various domains and how they interact and again rely on one another, and how having a baseline of what I call brain health pillars to support your well-being. So healthy development and movement, nutrition you mentioned. I also throw in things like sleep, quality, adequate sleep, to how you socialize with one another, to even things like screen time, managing your everyday decisions and what you fuel the body with and your brain with really does matter. You know, I oftentimes say these 3 things: what you do matters, what you think matters, what you eat matters. Everything comes down to those 3 basic principles.
What you do, think, and eat matters.
That's right.
Yes,
I say it almost
yes.
every presentation.
I love that. Yes. So, and there has been a lot of research showing how, especially, you know, I am more connected personally to ADHD as having that myself and my kids, but also autism and other mental health issues, how movement is so important for the brain. And there's plenty of research showing how daily activity is crucial for better focus, better attention, and even executive functioning. But I know that you all go even deeper
Absolutely.
with specifics. Like, I don't know, like, I'm think just proprioception, all these other magic words that are out there that are even more fine-tuned that we don't realize that we benefit from. So, and even I want to speak to also how this is a lifestyle program essentially that you have. It's not just diet and exercise. It's also what are they doing at home? And it kind of connects to what I talk about in an earlier episode. I talk to everyone about how our body is like a tree. And if we were to look at functional medicine, the roots of our tree have all of these inputs, and they can be supportive or they can be depleting. And I think that in our culture, we promote a lot of these depleting tools like, you know, social media and our connection to phones and screen time, even more structured type of activity and competition, and how that adds a lot of stress and lack of sleep. Like you were talking about, sleep is important. So it's not just food, but all these inputs, and the trunk is like our genetics. Each of us are unique and our microbiome is unique, and how that manifests as our leaves, which might includes behavior. So if I were someone coming into your program, whether I'm 3 or 93, you are definitely addressing all types of especially mental health challenges, because most people, that's their concern, correct? Whether it be ADHD, autism, maybe dementia. What do you think are those main groups that seek your help?
We see all walks of life. So you named it. I would say ADHD or ADHD symptoms are the number one thing we serve.
Mm-hmm.
And only because the alternative outside of our program is medication, right? That's the first option that they're given. And not everybody wants that to be something they put in their bodies or their child's bodies, or to be honest, not the medication's not enough or it doesn't work. So I would say that's the number one thing we probably see. And just so everyone knows, we don't require diagnoses and nor do we diagnose in our program. That diagnosis tells you that you fit this box, maybe, especially for something like ADHD. There's no one test that really determines that. But then there's autism, learning disorders like dyslexia, there's executive function challenges, to mental health you mentioned. I would say anxiety is probably the number two thing we see. And oftentimes there's what we call comorbidity, meaning there's an overlap in various challenges, to anger management as well. I see quite a bit of that. Traumatic brain injury, to childhood trauma and psychological trauma, to those who are wanting to do brain balance for enrichment, wanting to improve their memory and cognition, to having some of the top athletes in our program as well.
Yes, we forget about that category of brain injury because the brain, as we know, there's that neuroplasticity that we can rebuild the brain.
Yep.
And that takes both brain exercises plus the nutrients to feed, for rebuilding, restructuring in that recovery process.
Let me talk about that real quick, because you mentioned how important exercise is. And we know that. You cannot refute that at this point. What people don't realize is that movement paired with sensory stimulation is the most powerful way to excite the neurons in your brain. That's why exercise is so important, and why being in nature and being outside and utilizing your sense of smell and touch and sight and hearing, all of it as much as possible is key. And then you said a big word, proprioception, earlier. That's your sense of self as in relation to the world around you. There's something called interoception, which is your sense of self and feelings within your own body as well. And that's how you regulate emotions, know if you're thirsty or hungry or need to use the bathroom. So we have more than our five senses, but again, engaging those senses while moving your body in an intentional way. And another thing is, in a progressively challenging way, is really what's key to not only, again, excite your brain, but actually build new neural pathways. And so when you are purposeful and you're meeting individuals where they're at and their levels, we can really build quite a few different bridges to allow for more adaptable responses to your environment and to information and stimuli that you're receiving, so that again you can function at your best and you're not being automatically impulsive, and that your mind's not just wandering, or that you're just too sensitive to your environment either. Okay.
Right. And I know that, you don't always have nature around you, especially when they're coming to your establishment, but it's something you can encourage during the week when they're at home or from home.
Yeah.
And so what I've had that was interesting is I got, the way I met you was through an open house at your location near Poway. And what was very interesting is even seeing where I had deficiencies, right? So and you'll explain it better than me, but basically we had to do types of balancing exercises while we're being distracted by this pulse on our wrist. We have to wear these glasses that are doing something else. So we have all this stuff going on while we're trying to maintain balance. And there were some parts where it's like, oh, this is kind of hard.
Yes.
And you see how anyone could benefit from something like that, to just for better mental sharpness, right?
Yes. Now, the thing is, how does balance or being stimulated by these sensory pieces translate into the real world? And again, we have to take it back to development. For you to balance, you need to have a strong core and a strong vestibular system. So we're working on those pieces. For you to walk across that balance beam required some coordination as well. That requires cross hemispheric communication. And so these, what I call brain systems, have to be developmentally appropriate for each individual. And then B, those systems have to work together. And so everything there's a method to the madness, essentially. And the goal is for you to build all these neural networks that relay into the real world. Because who cares if you can walk across the balance beam in our program, right? The goal is that this walk across the balance beam equals these types of connections in the brain to equal better emotional regulation and empathy and calming the nervous system. That's the purpose of it all. It's not just for fun. It's not just exercise because it's good for you. It's to build very specific neural networks and building and really triggering as many different connections across the brain as possible to allow, again, your brain to be adaptable and have appropriate, what we call sensory processing. We're responding to our own bodies and to our environment in any given moment. And so something like your visual system, which is your primary system, if you're not able to efficiently or adequately filter out what's not important. And if you're getting fatigued looking back and forth near or far from your desk, to across the room, or when you're driving, there's all this stimuli and information that you need to make sense of. And your brain, if it's working harder than it needs to be, it's going to be taxed easier. You're going to be stressed more and you may be frustrated, right? And there's this whole cascading effect. So again, not looking at just what's wrong or what's obvious, it's understanding all these systems and how development plays into your operations.
Right. So if I were to give an example, like myself or my son, ADHD, how we can be easily squirrel, like distracted, or we can jump and have 10 burners going and jump project to project, or, train of thought goes different directions. So through these exercises, a person can remain more centered in the midst of more chaos, or simple as being in a classroom and being able to focus in a classroom with other kids.
Yes, really anything, right? How is the brain going to do what it's supposed to do? So I call it clearing out the traffic jams, making sure the brain doesn't take that scenic route where eventually it forgets what it's supposed to be doing. So that efficiency, that adaptability I mentioned, that is what's key.
Right. And so what I've heard about more specifically with autism is they have a greater challenge in that they almost are not completely assimilated to being in their body. Am I saying that correctly?
That's a great way to put it. A lot of times it's like, feel your breath and feel your body. And again, that takes few different brain systems, interoception in particular, and not everybody can feel their body that way. Think about the kiddos or even adults where they might bump their elbow, but it feels like their arm is going to be amputated, right? And you're like, what is going on? You rarely tapped it. But for their brain and their system, it's processing it very differently. And so even think about bedwetters. I see bedwetters aren't just the little ones who are still learning how to potty train. I've seen teenagers where they can't feel their own body yet and know that I need to go, hunger, thirst, the same thing. So now you're going to more complicated emotions and you wanting them to regulate that as well and understand social cues and sarcasm and jokes. That is a higher level ability in thinking that is really not realistic or fair to expect of them when they can't even feel their own body first. So yes, getting them to have the brain connections and systems to be developmentally appropriate so they can, again, start to feel that and know that is key. It's not always a matter of, are you happy or sad? It's not about that. It's much deeper levels of understanding within the body first.
Right. I mean, I've been through some classes, I would say, to learn about some of this and how even as simple as like grabbing our arms or squeezing our joints, like proprioception to keep yourself
That deep pressure.
like grounded while you're
Yeah.
listening, telling kids to like squeeze your arms while you're listening to the teacher, or writing while you listen, like movement, things that can help
That's
you
right.
stay in your body to listen better. And then that it's almost like the tactile issues too, and why we see so many of those that are on the spectrum, how like a tag on clothing will bother them. They'll feel it and they can't get it out of their mind. It's just there, or the
Yes.
feeling of their clothing,
That
or picky
hypersensitivity.
eaters. Yeah. I mean, does this help picky eating, do you find as well? Do you
Yes,
get
we
a
see a
lot of
lot
that?
of picky eaters. Yes. So the question is, are they the standard typical kid learning how to eat different foods, or is it a sensory disruption where their brain is processing these inputs in it? Not necessarily wrong way, it's just not in an appropriate way. And so just getting them to try foods and try harder, it's not always about that, right? Whether it's trying foods or focusing or whatever it may be. I see so many students, especially my adult students, who have heard it all, right? They're not trying hard enough, or they're being lazy or whatever, that it's their fault, when the reality is not really. A lot of times their brain is just not processing it the same. And sometimes they just can't help it right now. And it, again, not meant to necessarily be used as an excuse. It's just more understanding and empathy. And then what can we do about it to get them to function at a level that doesn't disrupt their well-being?
Right. And so you could see how it could be two things that you're addressing at the same time. So let's say it is more of a texture issue. But then it's also that they had gotten used to eating more, let's say, highly processed savory foods, which is common whether you have texture issues or not. So you're having to gradually get them used to new textures, probably through exposure, but also really educating them on maybe how we feed our microbiome, and maybe then they'll
Exactly.
be more open and receptive to
Yeah.
trying new foods. Because I know even when I had shared this before, working with kids in the school garden, how they would resist, especially vegetables, but somehow vegetables were exciting if they got to go into a garden and pick them, and they would
Get hands
actually
on.
eat them. And the funniest story I have is like at a lunchtime, they're all coming into the garden. I'm letting them all, I had to trim the broccoli leaves, and there's these huge broccoli leaves, and each of the kids are carrying them and they're eating them. They're eating broccoli leaves, and their teeth are green, their lips are green. And I made the mistake of, allowing them, hey, yeah, just take one with you. And the
Eat it
teachers see
both.
all these kids coming and eating broccoli leaves.
How
But it's
beautiful
like,
though, right?
how do you get, I mean, if you put a broccoli leaf on the table on a kid's plate, like there's no way
No
they're going
way.
to eat that. But they're in a different environment. They're a little more curious because there's
That's right.
a deeper connection
That's right.
to that food and understanding why they need it. So not that we have to eat broccoli leaves to eat healthy.
But making food fun, right? Again,
Yes,
knowing where they're involved.
exactly.
So something
Yeah.
we encourage our families to do as part of our nutrition program is making food fun again. And that involves getting them to shop with you at the grocery store, to know what produce is out there. How do we choose the right produce? Helping in the kitchen prepare that meal, smelling the different spices and flavors. So maybe not even trying it, but just being a part of it so that they know what's out there. And then you mentioned the word curiosity. That's key. Getting them to just start to be curious about what foods are showing up on their plate, and what foods are possible to show up on their plate too. So getting them involved is key. And those are what we call the tools. So yes, exposure and making it fun and getting them to be a participant in the experience is key. And then again, what we also do is the foundational piece is making sure the brain can receive that stimuli and that input and curiosity as well. And so I call it that sandwich effect. So while tools are important, we need to make sure we build that toolbox too, to be able, again, to be receptive and be able to handle those different sensations.
Right. But at least it sounds like what you also do is you give them the why. I think that
Yes,
oftentimes we just tell our kids, this is what
it's
you
good
need
for
to eat.
you.
Eat your fruits and vegetables. It's good for you. And really, when they have this deeper understanding of what it's doing for their gut and their brain, and then I'm sure that you have them reflect on how it is, how they're experiencing change.
hmm How it makes them feel.
Right. So what are, well, actually, before I dive into some examples of some of your clients, what would a typical, I guess, program be like? How many weeks, and then how often are they meeting? Is it virtual, in person? What is the most, I guess, common program that people join in on?
So our typical program, our traditional program, most people see as in person, although virtual or hybrid is an option as well, especially if you're not within San Diego County. I do want to say we've had families drive 2 hours each way. They're committed because
Wow.
that's their preference. But we also have families literally around the world. I have a family that we finished last year from Switzerland. We have a family in Mexico right now, and Argentina and South America. So we see people all around the world. So if you're closer to San Diego, come into our center. The commitment is a minimum of 4 months. You have to give the brain time to change. And we see our students 3 times a week for an hour. In the hour that they're with us, they're doing over 30 different activities across the different brain systems and developmental areas that we briefly discussed. While they're not at the center, we're also expecting them to do some mild home exercises too to really build up these connections. Because one of the ways that new neural pathways are built is through that repetition. And I mentioned that progressively challenging approach and also being personalized to them. So by the way, no two students have the same program because everyone is unique. So we start with an assessment, whether it's an assessment before you enroll or you don't have to do an assessment, especially if you've been through the ringer and you already have these diagnoses. You don't need another assessment to tell you what you already know. We'll build the assessment into the program so that, again, it's all still personalized to each individual. All right. Again, 4 month minimum. Most people are about 4 months to a year. For our adult population, for more flexibility, the adults can choose to do 2 or 3 times a week in person, but most people are doing it 1 time a week in person with the expectation that they're training themselves for 4 days out of the week, just like if you're going to a regular gym. So that maintenance and that consistency is really what's key to build that foundation. And the great
Hmm.
thing is, when you're done with brain bounds after those handful of months, you're not having to do brain bounds for the rest of your life. Once you build the foundation, it's there. And that's what we mean when we say we change the trajectory of people's lives, is because once you build that foundation, you're able to keep moving in this positive direction with the understanding that you maintain those healthy lifestyles and understandings that we've taught you. It's not just the brain training, as you mentioned, it's all of it coming together so that you can live your best life. And we're always here to support you afterwards as well.
Right. So then let's say someone finishes your 4 month program. I'm sure there's exercises that are recommended to maintain. Are these types of exercises for a lifetime? And as for the changes that have already occurred, can some of those be considered permanent or require that maintenance? Does that make sense?
It does. So remember that the minimum recommendation for our program is dependent on each individual, and that's what we assess when we first meet with you. So the program may be a minimum of 4, but maybe we require 6 or more if we really want to help you meet those developmental goals. That's the plan for graduation essentially. And
Right.
so when you graduate, you already have this plethora of knowledge and exercises that you can do. If something should arise in the future, you're like, oh, I just need a little fine tuning here or there. But again, you're not having to do the whole 1 hour of exercises every day for the rest of your life. That to me is quite demotivating because that's a lot of work. That's a lot of energy that is not necessarily sustainable. However,
Right.
what is sustainable is knowing the tools that you can come back to as needed. And again, you're always going to be a part of our brain balance tribe. So if you need any advice, we're still here from you. I'm still in touch with people 5 years out, right? So it's really important to know that you're part of this village and that you're not having to do everything on your own and figure it out. And, that's that. And that these connections that you've made in the brain, yes, they are long lasting. And yes, you put in the hard work that will pay off. All right. If you follow the plan and you do the best that you can on your end.
Right. Because like anything, because the brain is malleable and so is the microbiome, that changes that you still want to be eating well to maintain a healthy microbiome, but you also want to maintain almost like a maintenance exercise plan, like you would other types of exercise, staying active. Yeah. So, but at least it's not as intense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what do
what
you
I
do?
do,
I
I've
want to
been through the
know.
brain balance program. Exactly. I finished a few years ago and I can still feel the benefits of the program today. And what I do
Mhm.
for maintenance is not necessarily brain balance. I still stay active. I try to make sure in my exercise plan that I think about the different developmental systems. So I always make sure there's a core exercise. I always make sure there's some kind of balance exercise, that I'm working on some visual processing and coordination and timing as part of my routine, but it's not necessarily the specific brain balance exercise at this point. But I also know I need to change it up. I can't just do the same exercises all the time. So I vary what I do, and I also wear my sensory gear still. So those glasses that you mentioned that you got to try and the little tactile vibration on you, I still wear that sensor gear because remember, it's that pairing that makes it so much more powerful. And it's passive. I don't have to think about it. So I still wear my sensory gear. I mix up the type of sensory gear and the different levels, and I mix up my exercises and making sure I maintain that healthy lifestyle of working out at least a few days out of the week, making sure I make healthy food decisions so that my gut, my second brain, is working with my big brain up here, and making sure I practice mindfulness daily, making sure I get quality sleep. I remind myself almost daily, sleep is non-negotiable. So I
Right.
do actively practice those brain health pillars even after doing the brain balance program. Brain balance isn't just this magical silver bullet that, oh, once you do it, everything is fine. Again, there's all these other elements that need to be a part of your plan. Just like medication can't be the only solution, you need to have all these different pillars in place to support your well-being.
So what do you find gets in the way most of the time for families today? Gets in the way of supporting better health? And even for those people in your program, what are their greatest challenges? I know social media is a big one, but what are you noticing in your program?
I would say it's similar to what we just discussed, the habits.
Hmm.
Are you really wanting and ready to make that change? Because it does take effort and energy to change the habits of not relying on fast food, for instance, because we're on the go, or watching TV to quote unquote have downtime, right? And decompress, to, could be scrolling, right? Not being, using the excuse that I need to make sure I catch up with the world, or catch up on emails, whatever it is, we have these excuses. And if we're not really ready to make that change yet, then it's not that you won't make change. It just makes that change so much harder. Right. So that's one thing. Sometimes it's another parent or family member who's not on board with those changes either. Maybe one parent is and the other one doesn't quite believe in it, or again, want to make that change for themselves. And so I've had to have those one-on-one heartfelt talks with the other parent or grandparent. They mean well. But grandma, you can't keep feeding your grandchild, the candies every time you see them because you see what it does to them. They don't feel good afterwards. The behaviors show up, and it doesn't just affect their family, but affects, or their immediate family, affects you, and it affects that individual. So if you really love and care about them, we need to be on the same page about how to support that individual. So just being ready for that change and changing those habits. And again, we work with you on that. You don't have to do it alone. And really overcoming that fear, especially for something like diet changes, that I would say for some families, that's one of the most intimidating pieces because maybe their child's already such a picky eater, or they know that they have that lifestyle of grab and go foods. We'll help you though, and change is possible. And it's not about perfection. We remind people that as well. It's about making
Yeah.
those small changes to make progress, right? Practice makes progress.
Yes, I definitely emphasize it doesn't take perfection, and there can always be bad days too, and knowing that you can come back to it. But true, like as parents, we need to be role models for what we expect of our kids. And if we're not doing it, then it's always going to be, well, why do I? And also, even if, let's say, that child needs that support, let's say that eating healthier makes a bigger difference in their behavior. Sleep is more important yet than the adults in their life. I'm not as sensitive, so I don't have to be as careful. Then it doesn't, then that child feels worse about themselves.
Yeah, it's me,
And
it's
I
my
always,
problem.
yes, this is my problem. I'm a problem child. Uh, you know, so I feel like when the family is on board, to understand that the entire family benefits from this, because
That's right.
even if they're not as sensitive as that particular person in their family, that eventually it will catch up to them, and that they will actually feel better in the present moment, right? We can feel good, but we don't realize we could actually feel better. so,
Yeah,
so yeah,
exactly.
I do find that, parents have play a big role in modeling that behavior. And I do find it is hard sometimes to go to those better coping tools.
Of course,
You're
we're human.
exhausted after a long day, and then, oh gosh, I got to make a meal. But I definitely have learned fast ways to make easy, really good, healthy foods. And then also that fatigue where, I just want to watch Netflix, right? But what about a game night, where you're connecting more as a family, playing a game of cards or a board game that it feels like a lot of work at first, but I know our family, once we do that, it's so much more fun. But the thought of it can sound a little exhausting at first. So it's just about taking those
Yeah,
first steps
it
to
is.
discover those alternatives.
And having
Yeah.
that plan you said. So thinking through like, okay, when I'm exhausted, what are my options? If you plan ahead, so it does take a little bit of work in the beginning, but once you
Hmm.
plan ahead, you have those resources and tools to take out of your tool bag. And as you were speaking, it made me realize the why again. You started this conversation about my why and what brought me to Brave Mountains and how Brave Mountains is technically we didn't talk about Brave Mountains why, but similar, just wanting to give people that opportunity to thrive and meet their potential. When we make our everyday decisions, we have to come back to our why as well. Everyday life, you have to understand your personal why because that personal why is what drives your actions both personally and professionally. And so what I try to think about sometimes is, like you mentioned, I'm tired. I just maybe want to watch Netflix. Well, if I make this decision, does that align with what I want for myself and my goals? And if the answer is no, what else can I do? Right. And then also giving yourself grace because sometimes it is very cognitively taxing to make decisions all the time. And so give yourself grace. That's okay. And make a better decision the next time, right? Make a commitment and have that intention to align your actions with your goals and your whys to support that future that you, and presence and future that you want for yourself and your family.
Right. And going back to perfection is not expected. And that it doesn't mean you're never going to watch TV again. I mean,
Yeah.
I love a good Netflix show for sure. And I know I'm using one example there, or that we need to eat perfectly. But it's just that when it's always our go-to most of the time, we don't recognize how it can be draining and more
Mm-hmm.
taxing for our system. So it's about finding that balance, that you have a limited amount of time, of screen time, so that you also have these down times, and renourishing times for your soul, renourishing the soul, getting out in nature, whatever it might be. So, yeah, that balance is unique to everyone. So,
Exactly.
Amanda, could you share an example of someone who's been through your program, what their experience was like?
So many. You know, as a company, just so everyone knows, we've been around for about 20 years now. We really are the global leaders. I mentioned that we see families from across the globe, and about 60,000 individuals at this point in those 20 years. Yes.
Wow.
However, there's definitely always ones that stick out in my mind at least, in everyone's minds. They have their breakthrough stories that really stay close to the heart. So I was, for whatever reason, thinking about this individual this morning. So I'll share him. This individual, his name is Gavin, and their family did authorize us to be able to use his story. And his story is on our YouTube, by the way, at Brave Mountain San Diego. Gavin was a student who went through so many different therapies and so many different schools. He had parents that really believed in him and fought for him, and they struggled through it because Gavin had a hard time managing his emotions and his behaviors. He had a hard time learning. He had low self-esteem. And honestly, a lot of it probably was because he was deemed that child in the classroom and was constantly moved, needed an aid, and over many, many years, just nothing was really helping. And as he's getting older, his confidence it just wanes more. And why try to be more than the kid that everyone kind of pins you at, right? And so Gavin was one of the students that we worked really hard with and had to build that trust and relationship that we're on your side and we're here all because we love you and not because we're trying to fix you. And that as much as you try to push us away, that we're still going to be here for you. I mentioned earlier, we really customized the program to each family, and this family was one we were very creative with, and again, constantly had to be on our toes to support his needs. And I'm happy to report that in just a few months, this child went from getting called home from school and IEPs goals that he couldn't meet, and just not having the relationships that he wanted and activities he couldn't handle, to now, this is quite a few years later now. This child is thriving. He's doing well in school. He has won awards on his sailing team. He's never been in a team in his life before that. Sailing, to have all the executive functioning, cognitive, visual, and motor skills to sail his own little tiny boat and be part of a team as well is incredible. But again, not a miracle. The parents, Gavin himself, and our team worked really hard to build up his development and his confidence, to let him know he was capable, and gave him the brain, build that better brain, we like to say, to allow him to thrive in this way. And so I was thinking about him this morning and wanting to check in. So I'm really happy that you asked this. And I'm like, I could talk about him. So check out Gavin's story on our YouTube. I would say that's a pretty special one.
That's great, though, that to see someone thrive, because you see how it affects their self-esteem, and especially just how they feel at their core. It breaks your heart to see someone feel so awful about themselves. That really is the hardest part of those that feel outside of the box. And to give these kids these tools to help them function along with everyone else, just to make them feel a part of the big picture, how they fit in, it just means so much to them and the family.
What's beautiful about this program is because we build that stronger, better brain for individuals, confidence is the number one byproduct of our program. Whether you're a child or an adult, typically the adults are the ones who can communicate it better. However, that confidence and that self-esteem builds through you being more capable, right? And seeing and feeling that difference in yourself and how you function. So I think that's one of the most beautiful things about our program that people don't necessarily come to our program for and yet still get to walk away with. What did you say at the end? Because, oh, okay, I know what I say. Okay. To also follow up with your last comment of how individuals feel about themselves, that sense of what I call belonging is really key. I do a lot of trainings about that as well. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are key. And it's all for the purpose of belonging. We all want to feel like we're part of our community and feel good about ourselves. And that's what Brain Balance sets families up for and individuals up for, to really see and believe and feel that in themselves during the program. And of course, after the program and onward, once they leave and
Yeah.
graduate.
Well, it's just amazing to hear how you're changing so many lives. And you had said 60,000
Yeah,
had
we've served about
participated.
60,000 individuals at this point,
Yes, over
and
20 years. So you are
yeah.
really, your program's really making a difference in lives today. And where can people find you? Where's the best way to find more about your program? Uh, do you have a website to share?
And of course, at brainbalancesandiego.com is a great way to learn more. You can even take advantage of our free online assessment. There's resources that you can take advantage of as well, blogs and webinars on demand, because we're just here to be a community resource and educate everyone that there's a better way. There's definitely a better way forward, and it doesn't have to be the mainstream route that you have taken or are considering taking. Save yourself time and money and energy and just really get to the root of what's going on. And our website is a great place to start. I also invite you to just stop by and visit any of our centers. Our main center is in San Diego in Carmel Mountain Ranch. That's where I'm at most of the time doing my meetings. And then we have our two satellite centers in downtown Chula Vista and Encinitas as well. And so if you're interested in learning more, just message us and I'm happy to show you what's possible, what breakthroughs are possible for you.
Yes, and I see on your website you have locations nationwide as well, don't
That's
you?
right. Yes, we
Yes.
collaborate with the other centers as well. There's a lot of synergy and teamwork that is involved in this special work that we do. So there are definitely centers across the nation that you, if you're not from San Diego or you know someone in a different part of the nation, you can refer them there, or we can refer as well and help you make the connections that can really honestly change your life.
Right. That's awesome. So, do you have any parting thoughts based on this rich experience that you have, especially for those, whether they can do the program or not? Are there parting thoughts for especially what you feel is important for kids today?
I would say for everyone, brain health is for everyone. We can
Not
all
just kids,
improve.
adults too. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. No worries. Because again, we tend to think about children and their development, their brain being fragile and still, everything's still forming. It doesn't matter if it's a child though, or if you're an adult, brain health is for everyone. So I think that's one parting thought, is to recognize that brain health is important no matter what age or stage you're in. Okay. The other one is to take control. There's so much that you can do on your own first to improve your well-being. So I mentioned what you do matters. So how are you exercising? How are you choosing to engage with others or not? How are you spending your downtime? Are you on screens, or are you learning something new for your brain? Are you getting enough sleep and winding down appropriately, right? So that's number one. What you do matters. What you think matters. What kind of thoughts are you allowing yourself to have? Are they positive, uplifting, motivating thoughts? Or are they, this is too hard, or I can't change and I just have to suck it up? That there's a difference in how the brain is wired when you think a positive versus a negative thought. So changing those thought patterns and breaking what we call these automatic negative thoughts at times is really key too. To what you eat matters. And I think that's a lot of what you do, Norma. Feeding and fueling the brain and body is key. and making sure that second brain of yours in that gut and that gut brain axis can communicate through a low inflammation diet, and low inflammation in general through the body is really key. And altogether, that for many can make a big difference alone without having to seek out any professionals. Of course, if you've gone down that route and you still need more help, that's when you should reach out to someone like Brain Balance. Or maybe you want to go down that route and support all these different brain health pillars, but you need support. That's where we come in as well, right? We're coaches. We're here to support you on this journey, and we do it so much better when we do it together as part of that village.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. That was just a great conversation to have with you today, and great parting words for everyone, and appreciate your time, and hoping that many will benefit by listening to these things that you shared and the importance of incorporating that into their own lives. So have a wonderful day. I love how Amanda started our conversation today, sharing what you do, think, and eat matters. And it's such a simple phrase, but carries so much importance in our lives. How are we spending our time each day when we look at the things that we're doing that support our mental health? Also, what we're eating, that always comes up here on Go With Your Gut. But finally, our thinking, the importance of how we think. What do we believe about ourselves? Because that usually tends to run the choices that we make our life, or how we live our life. So some great things to reflect on there, I think. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the discussion today in the comments below. And if you're only listening, head on over to my YouTube channel where you can leave comments there. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, be well.